Hey guys, how's it going? Michael Troy here. Welcome to the X-Men 97 recap with my special guest, Philip J. Urso. I am so excited to have Philip here. We've been friends forever and been threatening to do something like this. If you watch my show, I refer to him sometimes as my friend who says, I love everything. So I invited him here to talk about my new favorite thing that I love, the X-Men 97 cartoon, because it is so good. And he's quite the X-Men fan and quite knowledgeable. And I love all his opinions on everything. So I'm very excited that he is here with us today. Welcome, Philip. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Like you, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So I think this is going to be fun.
I have to say, like, they announced it quite some time ago, and like I like quasi watched the first one. Like I watched it here and there. I was more interested in clubbing at that time, unfortunately. But I've always been an X-Men fan, and but I feel a little out of the loop on it. Like I decided to forego like the watching everything before the new X-Men 97 launch and just jump into it. And I'm kind of glad I did just because I love it so much. How do you feel does it like exceed your expectations, or how do you feel like initial first response?
Absolutely exceeds my expectations because and if I'm hearing correctly or what you've told me before, you didn't watch the original series, right? Actively or period.
No, that is correct. So that's
Okay,
another good reason you're here, so you can fill in
cool.
the gaps.
So absolutely. But when you heard about it, it was like, oh my God, are they actually going to do this? And then, then you had all the strikes, so things were on, delay. But just, I kind of wish they had dropped like the whole season because, now it just leaves you wanting more and more than ever. But I understand the need for getting people to tune in every week. You're not going to, certain, streaming services don't make as much money by dropping full seasons all at once. And, that's why we're doing this maybe two or three at once and then one week after that.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I was wondering why, like, some people drop the whole season and some people don't. And I have to say, like, in a way, it's kind of good because now I have like this big, like weekly event. It kind of reminds me, like, when I was little, my gateway to superheroes and comic books was the Super Friends cartoon. I absolutely worshipped it. I feel like it was on so early on Saturday mornings that I would like that was my challenge of the week to get
Mm.
up early enough to see it. But I was thinking today that I feel the way about Wednesdays now, the way I used to feel about Saturdays for the Super Friends. Like I literally could not wait. Like Wednesday morning before I went to work, I had to watch the third episode that dropped. Like I'm on pins and needles. It is so good.
I mean, and how cool is it, like Super Friends wise, where we're going into that, we can interact with Shannon Farnan, Michael Bell, Christy Marston on Facebook and other social media outlets. Just like, we never thought 30 or 40 years ago things like this would be possible.
That is correct. I know, yeah, like quite different, right? I mean, yeah, I know. I mean, you've got to meet like a lot of your like voice actors and stuff like that that you've admired over the years. So that's
And
a cool thing.
I met six of the original cast last month from X-Men the Animated Series, who are some of them are reprising their roles now. Um, Allison Sealy Smith as Storm, Lenore Zahn, or is it Zan, as Rogue, George Buza is Beast, and Catherine Disher, who was Jean Grey, is now Val Cooper. Chris Potter is going to be Cable, but he was Gambit before, and Allison Court is another character that it's just escaping me right now, who played
Now,
Jubilee.
I absolutely adore the designs. I think it looks fantastic. Did they change the costumes that much? I mean, the biggest change, and I'm dying to hear your opinion on it, of course, is like giving Storm the Mohawks. So,
They had to give Storm the Mohawk, in my opinion, if they were going to go through the life death storyline, which apparently they are if you go by episode titles.
yeah, I
And
want to say I forgot to mention that this is like spoilers, like
absolutely,
abounding. Like if you have not watched it and don't want any spoilers, turn this off right now and come back and watch our opinion later because we're gonna spoil the shit out of it.
maybe we should have led with that.
Right? I know, yeah, but
Well, when
I
you
oh
post
well.
it, you can put a blurb over the link when you post this.
There you go. There you go.
But yeah, Storm, I think that the people think because they're doing the mohawk with the Jim Lee outfit where she had the long hair, some people just find it like not meshing up. But, some of her current outfits, she has a lot of outfits that embrace past and current designs. So I think having her in the mohawk with the Jim Lee outfit is perfectly fine.
I think so too. And you bring up a good point. Anytime you adapt something, whether it be to film or animation, there's bound to be changes. And I felt that they are using a lot of, pre-existing storylines, some from Claremont, some post Claremont. And of course, like given the, fact that they have several storylines from the old cartoon, like you can't make it exact. Like there's going to be fanboys who are saying that's not exactly the way it happened in the comic book. But I feel so far they've done a really great job of sort of meshing them and integrating them into the new versions or whatever.
And how they crammed Inferno into one episode. I mean, I'm impressed. I mean, I'm almost like, darn it, this could have been like a multi-storyline, like the Phoenix Saga on the original series was 5 episodes. And then they adapted Dark Phoenix, which most people will agree with me was their best comic to TV and adaptation of X-Men in general. They even like it more than most people like that more than any of the movies that were adapted. The Dark Phoenix Saga is clearly the biggest fan favorite from comic to screen.
I had that thought.
And in the animated version. Sorry.
Yeah. When I was watching this, I'm like obsessed. It is so good. And I thought, I know they're working on bringing the X-Men back to screen, which of course we're very excited about that. But I thought, wow, this sort of really raised the bar. Like it would be really sad if the live action films didn't live up to the standards of this cartoon, because I it's so raised the bar. Like it's easily the best thing on television right now. And there's so much buzz and the hype is real for sure.
It's just, I was not expecting to enjoy it this much because of the original 3 animated series. I tended in rewatches to enjoy Evolution the most.
Once again, I did not see that, but I love the aesthetic of that cartoon. I've always loved the aesthetic of that cartoon. It looks like a lot of fun.
Like other people, when it started, I was like, oh my God, they're in high school. What are they doing? And they're going to public school. But as you continue that journey through season 1, just the nuances they kind of take from the comics. And in some ways, they take more inspiration from the comics than the original animated series did. Not in all ways, but in some ways. Because the X-Men were teenagers when they started.
Right.
They were all high school age, except maybe Beast, who was supposed to be a super genius, so was maybe 18 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, Iceman was 16 at the time. Of course, it's retcon later that Jean was 16 at the time. So Iceman had to be 14 or 15. Everything changed over time of how young they were because you couldn't have them past 30 in the comics for a while because, 30's all.
I live in West Hollywood. I know that's ancient by any standards. So
now I'm 52 and I'm like, where'd that happen? I'm like, and they say 50 is the new 30, so I have to believe that.
Yes. Yeah. Let's hope, right? With any, yeah. So go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I was gonna say, at the end of the second episode when Storm lost her powers, were you gut? I was completely gutted again. I was devastated. Did not see it coming. And when it happened in the comic book, I was devastated. And I have to say, having Ford show up and at the end of the 3rd episode, spoilers again, and say we're gonna get your powers back, made me I feel was the opposite feeling of what I felt when she lost her powers, because I was oh, thank God. Because I mean, to Claremont's credit, because I always say Storm is one of his biggest successes as a writer. The journey of Storm just could be analyzed for days. I feel I was on that journey with her, and just to see the emotional arc and growth and the physical changes and the emotional changes she went through as a character. So she's really, close to my heart. And it took forever in the damn comic book for her to get her powers back. And I was a little annoyed. I was I don't know if I can go through the whole season without her having powers. So hopefully they fast track and get them back soon enough.
If they can do Inferno and like Age of Apocalypse, sort of, you know, as far as like not Age of Apocalypse, but Cable being taken to the future, spoilers, you know, if they can cram that, Inferno and Scott and Jean's wedding, and they had 4 storylines in episode 3. So I am confident that she is going to get her powers back by the end of the season, if not sooner, because 2 life death episodes, they're not back to back, but they are coming up in the next like 3 to 4 episodes.
Oh, okay. Then yeah, they'll have to do that. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, I was actually like, it's funny, like I was surprised how like cinematic it is. Like the scene, like the Inferno stuff was actually almost kind of scary. Like I thought if I were a young kid, I would be terrified by some of this. Do you agree?
The shattering of the window panes.
Yeah, like it felt like a horror movie in a lot of scenes.
And I know you had to be fanboying out big time when
I
Morph
know what
turned
you're gonna say. When Morph turned into Eliana, I lost my
I was like,
mind.
Michael is losing it right
I
now.
did. I was like, I'll take Eliana however we can get her, and this is amazing. I thought, wow, that was like a really smart character ad. Like when he turned into Spiral too, I lost my mind on that one. That was. Do you remember? Didn't he turn into Spiral?
He did. He's turned into Psylocke. And it's interesting that they're taking his and I guess Mystique's powers by association to the next level where, you know, before they could just shapeshift into other people. Now they're not just shapeshifting into other people, they're assimilating their powers. And in his case, he's creating weaponry too. So he's like Firestorm and like Sync and Mimic and Mystique all at once.
I think I take slight issue with that. That might be a little bit like, okay, whatever.
I know a lot. I'm just saying, but it's just interesting. I mean, I guess it's easier just to do it for visual purposes and to explain how his powers are supposed to work or how they theoretically worked in the original series. You know, he does have an episode when he comes back. It's his last appearance before the final episode because he has a story arc in he dies in season 1. Spoiler. He's revived.
I'm fine with that.
You find out that Sinister revived him, so that's where, you know, and in season 2, he's like, he poses as the priest who marries Scott and Jean, so they're not married. Dun, dun, dun. That time. We don't know if they're married now, because we don't know when the swap happened. We'll get into that later.
I was like, yeah.
So then he has his biggest story arc pretty much goes over, he's a supporting character through season 2, and then he goes to Muir Isle to get help off screen with, you know, to deal with his, you know, darkness that, because, you know, Sinister messed him up when he brought him back. And then by the end, everything's fine. But he has an episode called Courage where he tries to rejoin the X-Men and he has PTSD. And he's turning into like Omega Red, Archangel, I think, Longshot. And you see him kind of take on their abilities, not just their shape. So people at that time like me were like, whoa, he can do that because Mystique can't do that. So,
yeah, they always short shrift the women, right? I know it's funny.
Crawler's father now, yay!
I love that. I know. I was gonna say that seems a little like sketch there, or not sketch, but you know, like questionable. But I like it. I mean, it kind of makes sense in a way. I'm kind of on the fence. Like, you know, like I feel like assimilating someone's powers is one thing, but like actually like being able to turn your hand into a hand that's holding a gun might be a little bit much, right?
Yeah, and he created her, was it her soul sword or was it just a sword? And
right.
You know, how do you even know of Ileana's existence? Is he psychic now because she hasn't technically appeared yet?
I know, yeah.
She was a kid in season 2, episode 4 called Red Dawn, where we see Darkstar from the, you know, the Russian mutant.
Yes.
Not to be confused with the DC ones.
She's the one with long blonde hair, right? Darkstar.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
And she's.
I know my blondes. Okay.
Yes. So Ileana is 6 or 7 in that, and you know, Piotr, you know, is reunited with her by the end of that episode. He makes a reference to his sister in the first season of X-Men when he appears, saying he's going to go look for his sister. So we didn't know if they were going to go down the Belasco path then. They had all these teasers throughout the series that never kind of panned out, because in season 1 they talk about, you know, who is the traitor in the X-Men that Bishop can't remember from the future.
And that's
And
Beast in the storyline or in the comics, right?
it was Gambit in the
Oh,
comics.
okay.
Storyline, I think it was, wasn't it? It was Onslaught. So technically it was Professor X and Magneto. It was, that essence that formed into, that was when the Avengers and Fantastic Four had to sacrifice themselves and were transported into an alternate dimension during Fall of the Heroes or whatever. But it
And
was,
like, i.e., when X-Men jumped the shark. I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
the late 90s. Yes. But anyway, but we digress. But so the traitor in the cartoon was Gambit, but it was really Mystique disguised as Gambit who tried to assassinate President Kelly.
Hmm.
And so it was, but there's a comment about who is the traitor, and of course Scott, in his manly way, it can't be Jean. You know, all his other friends could be guilty, but it can't be her. And she's like, of course it could. And she makes a comment saying, I've had my dark days, or have you forgotten? And that's totally a throwaway line because she hasn't become Phoenix yet on the cartoon.
Nice. And then everyone's in the background, like, it's probably Jean. Of course it's Jean.
So yeah, that's how that storyline went. And we don't know. There's supposed to be a year between the end of the last series and the beginning of this one. So I don't know if they're going to bridge any of those gaps, like how Vic joins up again, why he's here, why he was here now, because he wasn't at the end of the last series.
Well, they just this week out, and I may or may not get it, I don't know, but they're doing the X-Men 97 comic book, and it's supposed to fill in the gap between the series.
Oh, awesome.
Like be sort of a prequel. So your answers might be there. I don't know, but I wasn't crazy about the art, so I don't know if I'll get it or not, but I am an art snob.
And what is your theory on, well, you didn't watch the original show, so I will give you my theory on when I think Jean and Madeline were swapped.
It's funny because one of my good friends, I convinced them to watch this with me, so now we're obsessed. And at the end of the second episode, he was guessing that it was Mystique, and I was like, I knew it was the Goblin Queen, so I couldn't tell him. But who am I guessing?
I'm just, yeah. Well, there was also a spoiler because I showed you action figures for the Goblin Queen for X-Men 97.
That's the funny thing. It's funny you should mention that because I always see that, and no matter what, whether it's a new Wonder Woman movie coming out or something, they always spoil something with some sort of outfit or character that, like you didn't know was going to be in the comic book. Now, I have to say that I'm very glad that they very quickly had Jean give birth, Cable get the technovirus, and then send him into the future, because I have never been a huge fan of that storyline. But I feel like we're getting Cable this season, aren't we? Like, is Bishop coming back with Cable probably?
Or Bishop's going to say, sorry, I lost him, and then Cable comes back on his own.
Oh, okay, which would make more sense, right? Now, we never saw Rachel Summers in the first X-Men cartoon, did we?
She makes a cameo in Beyond Good and Evil when Sinister and Apocalypse kidnap all psychics, whether it's across time or across the universe, because Oracle, the member of the Imperial Guard who looks like, Pale Storm.
Yes, yes.
She was one of them. And you saw like glimpses of Karma, my favorite New Mutant ever. Yay.
I was going to say, we're definitely talking about Karma.
And then you saw like Typhoid Mary, Strife in the background. You just saw a bunch of people. They just threw in a bunch of psychics in the background. None of them had speaking parts except for Psylocke,
right,
as far as stars go. And that was the only.
Was it Asian body switch Psylocke?
Yes, it was. Okay. It was Jim Lee Psylocke.
Okay.
And they hint at a thing between her and Archangel at the end when he says, because first she's like robbing him. She's apparently like this Robin Hood character in this version. She's stealing from rich people to help her brother help mutants. So apparently she's like the Robin Hood and Little John of stealing rich artifacts to help support funding for downtrodden mutants or something. I don't know. That was just the implication they were giving us. but in general, I guess all mutants are probably downtrodden.
I was going to say that almost sounds like an oxymoron. Like
Mhm.
mutants have it
Because
bad enough.
they were not well liked by the public on the show.
Right.
And although Senator Kelly had become pro-mutant because they saved his life at the end of season 1.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was supposed to be like hope for the future. And of course, that's when Sinister comes in saying, Sinister knows what your future holds.
I love Mr. Sinister. I remember when he was introduced into the comic book and he just seemed so like crazy and cool. And I just like, you just have to love somebody who, a villain who just like, yeah, I love like an old school villain who's just full on named Mr. Sinister. You know what I mean? It's like,
he's my favorite villain, you know, long-standing villain to the X-Men.
it's interesting because I mean, you know, when you first see him, you can't help but think of Colossus. You know what I mean? Given his sort of
mixed with Dracula.
Yes, exactly. Oh, actually, that would be like a great storyline. You know, I mean, I feel like Bloodstorm is like one of the best storms ever too. Like, I feel like there's not a bad storm if I think of it. Maybe Kid Storm, I wasn't crazy about that. Like when they de-aged her, I was just like, why? You know what I mean? Lil Ro or whatever. I'm like, okay. I know.
I liked her dialogue with Gambit at the time, though. That was always cute. That they had good, you know.
Yeah, you know what I have to say, like what the cartoon does very well, since you mentioned that, is like what you know, one of our favorite things about the X-Men is the relationships between the characters. And like when the team was questioning Jean about, you know, her legitimacy and stuff like that, and she said Storm would have, you know, believed me. Like a knife in your heart, right? I
But
know,
again,
I'm like,
would she have? Because who's more perceptive than Storm? You know,
I know, but I think it was just talking about like her, you know, their relationship. You know what I mean? Like I don't. She shouldn't have to prove herself to them, and like Storm is loyal like that. Is what I took from it.
Yep. Now we don't know if in this year between, you know, series, if that's going to be explaining when the swap happened, or, you know, when it could have happened, because there are 3 times in the series where Jean is kidnapped by Sinister. Twice over season 2, and once in season 4 when all the other psychics, as I told you, and Beyond Good and Evil, it's a 4-parter. You will love that crossover. Well, it's not really a crossover, but, you know, you have characters crossing over, but it's not a crossover between shows. But you will like that one. But I think that's when the swap happened, because it will establish that Jean and Scott are married for real this time, because they had their second wedding that Morph did not, you know, mess up. And then when she's kidnapped by Sinister and Apocalypse, that would have been a perfect time to do the switch. After they got them off of the psychic astral plane or whatever, the vortex of time, or the pathway of time where Sinister and Apocalypse took all the psychics, I think that's when Jean was swapped, because then it would make Jean Phoenix, because it takes place after the Phoenix Force. Because, you know, when Madeline and her, she's like, we don't know which one of us is Phoenix. I think fans will lose their cookie or whatever if they establish on this show that Jean wasn't Phoenix.
That would be crazy. You know, they would lose their cookies 100% because we know how voracious the fan base is, and you are definitely one of them. So
they would be unforgiving.
And I'm one too. Yeah, I know.
And we would join them. We would head the lynch mob.
You know, I like unpopular opinion, and I'm glad we're not doing this in person because you might reach over and choke me. But I've never been the biggest Jean Grey fan, and here's why. Because when I first started reading the X-Men, and it's around the same time you did too, I feel like 163 or 164 was my first issue, and Jean was dead and gone. You know what I mean? She was just sort of like this memory that people talked about, and it was just like, oh, Jean. And it felt like they put her on the pedestal and stuff like that. And I don't know, but I just like, I guess I just didn't care because I didn't have the emotional connection to her and her death and stuff like that. And I mean, I'm okay with her now, but I'm definitely more a fan of like Rachel Summers. Like, that's my Phoenix for sure.
Well, when I say best Phoenix ever, I have to make sure I don't tag my sister, who doesn't read the comics like I did, but I got her hooked on X-Men just randomly reading an issue of 174 in the car when we were kids. And you know the ending of 174?
Absolutely.
Time for is over. And Madeline becomes Dark Phoenix, and all of a sudden, my sister, who I didn't realize was reading this comic over my shoulder, is like, "What did she do to him?" So then we borrowed my brother's issues of Claremont's run of the Phoenix Saga and Dark Phoenix Saga. So she just always would just read anything that I would give her that was Jean Grey or Phoenix related. And so she's not like a huge X-Men comic reader, but she is a Jean Grey fan for life. Her granddaughter's name is Phoenix. It's not related, by the way.
But it's a happy, like,
but it's a happy thing.
coincidence.
Her daughter just really liked that name. I like to say it's related, and she's gonna be getting X-Men related stuff from me for the rest of her life. Well, for the rest of my life.
Right? Like how many like Phoenix onesies and
exactly. But so that just became my sister's, well, her jam. But when they brought Jean back, like you, I was kind of like, wait a minute, so Jean wasn't Phoenix? So that kind of was like a punch to the gut because it was such a powerful storyline. Mm-hmm. You know, nothing touched me as much than Phoenix's death, other than plug line, who is Donna Troy, the first time. Those are like my two, like, if I want a good cry, I'm going to read those. And of course, Ileana's death in Uncanny 303, that's another one that can really be a tearjerker. Even though it's not a Claremont issue, it's pretty emotional.
I know. I'm so hit or miss, like post Claremont. Like it really ended for me there, and it just really was never as good after that. But I mean, I did read some of it. I was
good until Age of Apocalypse, and then it just never recovered for me.
Yeah, I mean, half the time it's, it was more about like the artist or like a habit or something, just hanging on to it. But switching gears slightly, I forgot to mention how excited I was to see Sunspot, Roberto da Costa, in the first episode. And I was like, wow, I don't like, if they want to make a lot more money, they should definitely do a New Mutants spin-off cartoon, because they have storylines for days. I feel like it's like the X-Men cartoon, they have Morph, and like, he's turning into all these characters, probably a lot of characters that they won't have time to feature on the show. So they need like a sister show, just like the X-Men book needed another book. You know what I mean? The stories are out there. I mean, they would never run out of stories. Well, in whatever the cycle of a television series is anyway, right?
And it was funny because for the longest time, even though I was reading comics, that I first started reading X-Men and New Mutants right when New Mutants 1 came out. Mm-hmm. So I had read Uncanny 166, which was like one of Paul Smith's best issues, the end of the Brood saga. And 2 weeks later, New Mutants 1 came out. So that's when I had really gotten into it. But I just, where I thought Alpha Flight was the first spinoff for some reason, just back. But Alpha Flight actually came out after New Mutants, maybe only by a few months or maybe less than a year. I guess because Alpha Flight had made appearances in X-Men first.
Well, so New Mutants came out before Alpha Flight or after?
It did. New Mutants is the first official ongoing spinoff, if we're talking intended.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But Dazzler was the first official, even though she was created conceptually, as her standalone character. They just decided to introduce her in X-Men.
Yeah, I know, that's so interesting, and it's weird. It's so weird how like interrelated that is, because can I say your husband's name? No.
Oh, who's my husband?
I'd rather John Romita Jr.
He is an awesome man.
Well, he created the look of Dazzler, if I'm not mistaken, based on Grace Jones initially, because of some weird music deal with Casablanca Records that Jim Shooter cooked up with Marvel. And then they wanted her to be big. And like, I think she was going to have like an album and everything. And like, then something didn't happen. And then they just wanted her introduction to be into the X-Men. And I feel like, I know John Byrne was against it for sure. Like, he laments it to this day, but I feel like Claremont always did like a really good job of like trying to make people not hate Dazzler or not make her a joke. Do you know what I mean?
Well, but here's my thing, because he introduced her, and I loved her introduction, and I love everything Claremont. I mean, Claremont, turns straw into gold. But and maybe it's because it's a team dynamic. I felt that she was stronger in her own series, of course, because she's a solo artist in that. But I felt when she joined X-Men, and I don't know if this was intentional or just because now she was part of a team of 8, she just lost her edge.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of truth in that. Like that makes a lot of sense because, like, if she's on her own, her powers don't seem as kind of silly as they are. They're not really silly, but it's like, what are they doing compared to the rest of the X-Men? You know what I mean?
I mean, they expanded her powers beautifully in X-Men, and Silvestri draws a gorgeous Dazzler.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
And I love actually 2 of my favorite issues during anything that was post Burn. I mean, I like anything Claremont, like I said, awesome. And their Dazzler issues is the ones that are right before Fall of the New Mutants, where she saves Rogue from what I call Malorus.
I was going to say, is that the one with Malice with John Bright?
Yeah. Okay. When the X-Men kick some Marauder's butt in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And those 2 issues, I mean, Madeline is awesome in those because she doesn't have powers, or so we think, and she's like throwing a metal tray in Scrambler's face and knocking him out or whatever, or was it Scalp Hunter? And she almost takes out Scrambler with a high-powered rifle or something before Arc jumps into the fray and just stops her. But I mean, Madeline was badass. Dazzler was badass in that. Rogue. Who doesn't love Rogue? Even in her gas station
I was gonna say, like, I mean, yeah, she's had some questionable outfits. She's gone through some major questionable hair. I mean, she was confused at one point for a middle-aged lesbian gym teacher. I mean, she's run the gamut. Not to be confused with
Gambit. I did ask Michael Golden what was his intention, so I got it from him directly.
Well, tell us.
When he created her, he made her to be a middle-aged woman. He was not told that at somewhere down the road she was supposed to be 18 or 19. So he was just like, I was told to draw this character, blah, blah, blah. He was super nice. I've been fortunate enough to meet him twice. And, he confirmed the rumor that, she wasn't, those were not streaks.
Yeah. I mean, since you brought up Michael Golden, I cannot mention, or I cannot have a conversation without Michael Golden without, of course, mentioning Avengers Annual 10, arguably one of the best X-Men stories ever, and the best Carol Danvers story ever. Like, talk about one of the best, most redemptive storylines ever. And like we could go on about Claremont forever and ever, and we will throughout this series of recaps. But I mean, just to have that just shows what an amazing writer he is, to have that thought. And he knew that they did Carol dirty and he wanted to make it up to her, and he did it so beautifully, and it was so beautifully drawn by Michael Golden as well. I mean, have you ever seen Spider-Woman look better?
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
I mean, and Spider-Woman had some good artists too. I mean,
yeah, I loved Brian Postman on Spider-Woman, and Steve Lee Aloha, of course, and I don't know who else, but.
And did Cockrum do Miss Marvel for a while? I'm thinking
he did. Yeah, I feel like
he drew a beautiful Carol. I mean, and as you've said before, his costume designing is always stellar. He knew how to create costumes.
100%. Yeah, I know it. I know, they should. I know, I would love to. They should do just a book of all of his costume designs or something like that. It could easily sit next to Bob Mackie on the shelf or something like that. Dave Cockrum should have been the designer for the Cher show. Although we had Bob Mackie, so we didn't need anyone else. But
Cockrum and Perez, I could see their designs forever.
Yeah.
Designs, even the ones that people don't like, I think there's just something magical in them.
I know. Yeah, it's easy to pick out a Perez design because there are certain hallmarks of Perez. Of course, an absurd amount of detail. There's usually a little bit of asymmetry, metal accents, and if you're a male, in big billowy sleeves if you're Pariah or Jericho. Yeah, and a pledging neckline that goes like beyond your navel.
And high collars.
Yeah, for sure.
What is it you call him? Disco Nightwing?
Just I know people get so mad when I call disco Nightwing, and I don't mean it I'm a gay man. I love disco, so like I'm living for disco Nightwing, and I don't think it's a derogatory term. Reclaiming disco, but I feel like people think it's dismissive or anything, but it's a little silly. His outfit, it does have. I mean, I didn't mind it, of course, but that collar is out of control, and I feel like Perez designed it to look a little bit like a trapeze artist in a way. Is that like the
Well, that was, inspired by his upbringing, so it makes sense. It's true to his origin.
by Perez's upbringing?
No, I'm talking about Nightwing.
Oh yeah.
If he made Nightwing look like a trapeze artist, which the Flying Graysons.
Well, see, that actually is like speaks to the strength of his, talent as a costume designer to put like that kind of thought into it. You know what I mean?
And switching gears, but still X-Men related. The screenshots I sent you digitally last night.
Yes.
I got the hard copy in the mail yesterday, which I thought I would share because isn't it interesting that this came out at the same time that Inferno aired? So I wonder if that was intentional.
Well, I have to believe that was completely calculated. That makes perfect sense. Like, don't they do that a lot? Like when movies are coming out, they'll like launch new, series of a book that, even if it's a character who never had a series before or something like that. I mean, but it's like whatever, because I don't, everybody says that comic books don't sell, but obviously they must make money off of those trade paperbacks because they're just reprints. So
yes, and I got this in the mail because I wanted a mint copy.
Oh my God, that makes my heart sing.
Because I will be meeting the Simonsons in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks.
And that will be the one that he's signing.
This and my X-Men Teen Titans, the best Marvel DC crossover ever, has a special place in my heart, as you know.
I do know.
It's previously signed by Shooter and Claremont, so I get Simonson, and it just seals the gap.
I know it would be amazing if you could get our favorite inker of all time, Terry Austin, to sign it. But I feel like, is he like a hermit or retired or just like, I don't think he makes public appearances and I don't think he works anymore. Honestly, I don't remember the last time
on social media or hear anything about him. I mean, God, I'm gonna have to Google him and just find out, he's still with us, right?
From what I understand, he is definitely still with us, but he's a little bit of an odd duck. And the interesting anecdote I will tell you about him really quickly, just because I think you will find it interesting if you don't know. And if you do know, it'll be interesting to some of our viewers. So as the inker on the X-Men, the way it worked back in the day is that the penciler and inker would divvy up the art. The penciler would get 2/3 of the pages from the comic books, and the inker would get every third cover to keep because they made a policy of returning art. So Terry Austin has a huge collection of X-Men art, and he also has the cover for Days of X-Men Future Past number, is it X-Men 142? 140.
The one where they're getting slaughtered by the Sentinel?
With the famous poster in the background with the spotlight and okay. So he owns that cover and he is like sitting on it. Like he will not he's saving it for some reason. Like, I don't know why, but like to preserve it, but he never lets them, like, for example, when they did the X-Men artist edition. Did you get that, by the way?
I don't think so.
Are you into artist editions? Because the two you would probably want are the John Byrne X-Men artist edition and the Jim Lee X-Men artist edition. They're oversized, scanned from the actual art. So you see like pencil marks, eraser marks, spilled coffee. It's the closest you will ever get to holding, the original artwork. And Paul Smith has one coming out in October, and I'm beyond excited. Like, I've been waiting for that one since I discovered artist editions. So I'm very excited. But the point I'm trying to make in this long-winded story is that, like, Terry Austin will never, like, he didn't allow any them to scan any of the art or anything like that for this, just to like save, he's gatekeeping it, damn it.
And
So,
didn't
and
he? Go ahead.
Rob Liefeld has actually harassed him and like tried to like shame him into like giving up the ghost, which I think is terrible. But we're not going to talk about Rob Liefeld this episode, and hopefully never.
I was going to ask the question of 143, the Kitty Demon Christmas issue. Did he do the cover for that?
You know, he did do the cover for that, so I would imagine that he probably just got that. You know what I mean?
But it also begs a question when you look at some of his solo art, which is very Byrne looking. You always wonder how much of our favorite pages were all Byrne or Austin-ish, you know, when we're seeing those classic issues, because they worked so well together. But, you know, some of Austin's faces on his solo covers, I would think it's a Byrne cover.
Right. Well, I think that's when you see Terry Austin's art, you can, it like flips a switch in your mind that you're like, okay, is, yeah, like that's the question. Like, how much of did Byrne have an influence on Austin's art, or was it vice versa? Because I
Yeah.
feel like you do see a lot of similarities, and Byrne's art does look very different inked by other people. You know what I mean? And that actually, when I got the artist edition, gave me such an appreciation for Terry Austin's inks, and like really brought home what, you know, what a contribution he had to the overall aesthetic of the art. Like, famously in the past, and to John Byrne's lament, actually, like, um, you know, Austin has done things like adding Popeye into the background. He's, you know, there's a one scene in Days of Future Past where Byrne had like no background whatsoever, and Austin very lightly inked in like a building in the background. The scene where Storm returns to Harlem, is it X-Men 122? And, you know, she goes to her parents' old apartment and it's been taken over by like junkies and drug lords. And like there's all this graffiti all over the wall. That's all Austin.
I was trying to think about Perez's only issue during Uncanny when he did Annual 3 with Archon.
Uh-huh.
It was years before I found out, because I didn't read who did the art as actively as a kid as I did when I got older. You know, of course, tell artist changes, you know, but you know, I was just about the story, you know, and the art just, you know, while it was always visually appealing to me, if the story was good, I just, you know, was just so drawn into the characters. But his, you know, Terry Austin being the anchor and Perez doing that gorgeous annual, it just looked, it could have been Byrne. So, you know, and didn't you tell me at one point there's like one page that or panel that was Byrne in that annual? It's like some sort of Easter egg.
I don't recall off the top of my head, but probably there was a lot of that. Like that makes me think of Action Annual 600, where it was drawn by Byrne and inked by Perez. There's actually a page in the book where they flipped it, and Perez inked it and Byrne, or Perez drew it and inked and Byrne inked it. But, you know, speaking of that annual, I missed the boat on that the first time around as a kid collecting. And so I got it within recent years to review for my show. And plus, you know, I wanted to read it. And yeah, I was immediately like had the thought like, wow, this really looks like, you know, Byrne a lot. And so it has to be the Austin influence, of course. But yeah, but you know, because Perez also drew a few covers during Byrne's run that were inked by Austin, and some people don't know the difference. You know, a lot of people I know have always credited it to Byrne, and it's actually Perez inked by Austin. So that's kind of interesting.
Uncanny 112 where Magneto kidnaps them to Antarctica. It
It's
looks like
such a great.
opera, but
Uh-huh.
it's Perez. In 128, the end of the Proteus saga, Perez looks like Byrne.
Yeah. I know it's weird because I think that like Austin was obviously the unifier to give that sort of X-Men aesthetic, you know. Uh, it's weird because Terry Austin well, he didn't stick with the X-Men after Byrne left, you know, like when he was supposed to actually ink Byrne on Fantastic Four and then wound up not doing it. I feel like he made a like I know he inked Leonardi on Cloak and Dagger, and you know, like oh my gosh, like of course, like when he inked Art Adams on New Mutants Special Edition, like I dare
And
you to find a better looking book. I mean, my God, it is stunning.
you saw my 18 by 24 I got from him
Yes. Uh-huh.
ago. Thought of you because I was like, do I need any more? And there's actually a display behind him where it has the Asgardian Storm, the X-Men lineup from Uncanny Annual number 9, you know, the Asgardian Wars, the covered classic X-Men one. There's just like all this stuff that he had right behind, you know, where his name was at his vendor table. And somebody was like, "Oh, do I want this or that?" I said, "You want it all." I said, "See all this X-Men related stuff standing behind this town gentleman?" And I said, "He's like, yeah." I was like, "I have it all."
You want it all.
I was
I
like,
know.
"I have it all. Not only do I want it, bought it 3 different events."
I really don't think, and as much as I love him and he is like the first one to draw her, Paul Smith, but I don't think there's anyone who draws a better Mohawk Storm than Art Adams.
I mean, it's a tough one because Paul Smith, you know,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what I say. It is like a tough call for
Mohawk
sure.
Storm was one of Romita Jr.'s best characters, I think. He drew a beautiful Storm.
I'm much more of a fan of Romita Jr. Now, even in the X-Men than I was then, because he followed Paul Smith for me, and Paul Smith was like, I don't know, like a religious experience, discovering his art. So I was very sad when he left. I thought his run was way too brief. It wasn't even a full year, and then we had
No.
it was interrupted by Walt Simonson's issue, which was fine. That brought Rogue to the X-Men, which you have right there. Oh my gosh, have you met the Simonsons before?
No, I was at Baltimore Comic Con 6 months ago, and I had met everybody on my list except them. I even made a list saying you've got to go to this person, this person. It was, you know, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. Everybody must meet him if they have a chance because nobody is more legendary or iconic than him, in my opinion. Art Adams, Chris Claremont was next. Art Adams. But then there was John Bogdanove because I wanted to get him to sign an art collage I put together from Fantastic Four versus X-Men, which I thought was his best work because I loved that. I
Yeah,
just it was very clean. It was
inked by Austin.
inked by Austin. Terry Austin, we need you. You're our only
We
hope.
do. I know. I'm trying to think. Like, I really don't. You know, we have so many pencilers that we love and for different reasons. But I feel like Austin is like just like the best anchor ever. You know what I mean? Like there is no one else like him, honestly.
Bob McLeod, first time I met him was at that event. And, you know, I loved his New Mutants. Want to talk runs that were too brief.
Yeah, for sure.
Just the way he created those characters and just made me instantly attached to them from reading the first page of the first issue. And that's how my love for Karma started, because as soon as I opened up the first issue, because I hadn't read the graphic novel yet, because it was harder to come by those back then. You could only get them in specialty shops, which weren't a dime a dozen like they were years later. So
I had the same experience. Yeah.
That issue 1, I opened it up and I saw Shan Koyman as one of the 5, when they did those Mouseketeer roll calls, in the beginning.
Love
And
that.
I was like, oh, wait, I know her. Marvel Team Up 100, one of the best Marvel team ups ever. And I just attached to her immediately because she was the one I had familiarity with. And then 6 issues later, I had to say goodbye to her. That was a punch to the gut,
Yeah, she definitely did not. She definitely got the short end of the stick. And the Marvel team up that introduced Karma that you're talking about by Chris Claremont and Frank Miller, was so good. Like I got that retroactively as well as part of my show. And I was really surprised like how much of the character was already formulated. Like, her signature sort of like possession energy.
Mhm.
That's what I love about the X-Men too. And I say this in my reviewers often is like, we know all their like energy signatures. We know how their powers work. We know what they look like. We know what they sound like, you know. So it's just like part of just one of the many things that makes being an X-Men fan
Mhm.
so enjoyable.
And what's at the end of that Marvel team up issue is that backup Storm and Black Panther story
Yes, it's done
drawn by
by
Byrne, which I loved. But and back to Storm, because you have mentioned your love for her, and I'm going to go into how much I am obsessed with Storm, as you are. Probably my favorite Marvel character, my second favorite comic character, probably after Wonder Woman, if Donna Troy's not fighting her for that spot. But Marvel related, I mean, nobody beats Storm. And seeing Forge at the end of that episode, like it's just, oh my God, because
I
to
know,
me,
did you die?
just because to me, that is the ex romance of my life. I know
Hmm.
people like her with other people. Heck, I even heard, I mean, she probably worked well with Wolverine for a while. And, her and T'Challa, I'm sure were a great power couple. I didn't read as actively then. Like you, I'm kind of stuck in, the Bronze Age and the 90s, picking up little things here and there.
Our Arrested Development.
Exactly. But it was just the fact that, that in one issue, they made that romance as compelling, if not more compelling, than Scott and Jean.
You know, um, I have mixed feelings about Storm, or no, about Forge rather, because but it's kind of messed up that he is like he made it. She fell in love with him, not knowing that he was the one who stripped her of her powers. Yeah, I mean that was pretty epic. See, like I'm that loyal person who is
Mm-hmm.
like gonna kick my friend's boyfriend's ass if they like dump you or something. So like I knew he did her dirty, and I just like I hated him for that.
But did he do her dirty? Because a lot of people say, "Oh my God, you created the weapon that depowered Storm." I'm like, he was he was an advisor and he worked for the government and he created that weapon to protect this planet from an alien invasion by the dire wraths. It was not a I'm creating this so we can make all mutants flat scans or whatever they called them. He
Right.
was doing that to save humanity. And Val Cooper stole his one prototype without his permission, which he had a contract with the government. That's when he went off because Mystique, as Raven Darkholme told him, and he's like, "She did what?" And he's like, "I have a contract," and he's like, "If they don't give me that back now, they can find themselves another scientist." And that's when he raced off to save Storm.
Well, when you put
Well,
it
he
that
went
way,
a rogue. He didn't know Storm was going to jump in the middle.
that's
So
true.
while Storm had perfect reasons for, she never let him explain his side of the story, even though it's one of the most powerful endings to an issue ever. When she says, "Someday I may fly again," I'm going to cry right now.
I know. Oh my God, I'm gonna cry too. Stop it. I know that's like we have too much emotional investment in
I'm going
this.
to be doing my Sandra Bullock miscongeniality thing.
I know, like Claremont is ridiculous with his writing. It's like I know he's made me feel like every emotion on the planet, and I just like, yeah, Storm just gets me every single time. You're right, and I
Yep.
just like, but okay, now that you've sort of redeemed Forge in my mind, okay,
Thank you.
okay,
Because I think we have revisionist because we're thinking about something and we just kind of forget all the nuances that led to it. He was not trying to wipe out mutant kind. He wasn't
true
selling.
that. And once again, props to Claremont. Like that's freaking crazy, right? Like that is so good. That's way better than anything they could come up with on One Life to Live. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I loved One Life to Live. Heck, when
I was
Vicky
trying
went
to
to
think of like one of the most compelling. So like I didn't watch it, but I know people were obsessed with it. So
oh, absolutely, Marsha Cross was on that back in the day, so that's when I first met her.
yeah.
Um, but just the fact that Storm had decided, not decided, I guess that's maybe a bad word, but when she went off to look for Forge, and then she comes into conflict with him and then realizes Naze was manipulating her. And as they're jumping off the mountain, he says, "Forgive me." or she says, forgive me, and he says, always, because she just stabbed him in the chest. And then they get sucked into that portal. I'm like, this is just great storytelling, because she wanted to kill you 5 minutes ago, and now she's like the love of your life again. I mean, and then they're trapped in that dimension for a year their time. And when she gets her powers back in 226, I reread that issue like every freaking day, multiple times, because like you, it was forever. By now,
Forever.
it was like 3.5 years. But, you know, we're now, it's like, oh, that was only 3.5 years ago in the comics. But back then, it was endless.
Endless. Endless. I know. It really was. Like, I almost thought it was never going to happen. Like, I was just like, how dare you? And then when it did, like, I was just as excited as I could be. So,
I mean, they had those teasers, like, you know, when Scott and Storm are fighting in the Danger Room for leadership of the X-Men, and there's that rainstorm out of nowhere. And in fantastic.
Yeah, I loved those teasers too. Like, it gave me chills every single time.
But the biggest one where you knew, and Forge explains it greatly when he gives her powers back, is in Fantastic Four versus X-Men #4, when She-Hulk lifts Storm up and says, pity you don't have your powers, Storm. If you had them, we could go around. And then you see Storm lose her pupils, and there's lightning crashing in the background. And anybody was like, okay, we know what just happened.
Right.
And we're like, but why doesn't she know, or why can't she control it? And Forge says, my neutralizer didn't so much as remove your powers. I don't know why I'm doing this voice. But
because you're a theater queen and I welcome it.
Exactly. So much as erase the RNA codes that allows you to access them. So then light bulb and that's what, okay, got it, done. Nice.
Right.
Again, on, brilliant. Shakespeare right there.
Yes, the nuances are definitely like, you have to appreciate the nuances. And even if you don't appreciate them, they affect you whether you know it or not, I don't know. So what do we think is going to happen next episode? Oh, by the way, I have to say, I'm so glad they brought in Magneto's like sexy costume with the big M on it.
Well, my nephew said, and it was funny, and this is my straight nephew. I have 3 nephews. But he has the best taste in men, because he's like, God, Magneto's got great hair.
The one thing, and the animation looks great, the effects are great, everything's great. The one thing that's throwing me off, and this is the only gripe I have, but I feel like some of the shadowing on Cyclops's face looks a little weird sometimes, but that's just a minor gripe for me. And I'm probably the only one who thinks that on the cartoon.
That con I'm going to in 2 weeks, Cal Dodd will be there. So I get to meet another X-Men voice actor, because he's Wolverine.
Oh, cool. I have to say, like, I feel like sometimes cartoon-wise, Wolverine can be a little irritating. So I was prepared to, like, roll my eyes at his depiction. And I was wrong. I loved him. He was so good. The one character, and not my favorite, that they haven't really focused on that much is Jubilee. And I'm kind of fine with that. Like, she seems like such a throwaway. I always felt like she was like a replacement for Kitty Pryde, and not a very good one at that. I'm sure there's a lot of Jubilee fans out there, and I apologize to you, but I'm sure she's great. But I mean, the fact that she's like this quasi Carrie Kelly ripoff anyway, and a stand-in for Kitty Pryde, and I don't know. It just.
I mean, she got great development in the comics. I am not denying that. But yes, at first it's like, is she Kitty Pryde? Her powers were similar to Boom Boom from New Mutants. And she's a little dazzler. But I will say that one of the coolest scenes in the first episode is when she's dancing with Sunspot. Those effects were beautifully done.
Yeah, I'm glad that the animation looks so good, because I wasn't sure what to expect, because I mean, it looked just fine in the old one, but obviously that was quite some time ago, and I feel like they must have elevated it quite a bit since then, huh? How does it aesthetically, how are you enjoying it compared to the first one? Is it like a huge difference to you, or?
It's enough where you can tell it's linked, but I think it's got definitely a more mature tone. And if they keep it up, it's more consistent. The first one, they were saying how so many different animation studios were doing the art or the cells, which is why the animation looks different in some episodes, why there were production problems and episodes aired out of order. we can talk about that next if you want, talking about, well, this happened at this time, but you can clearly tell it was supposed to take place before this.
Yeah.
And that happens there's actually an episode in season 1 where it happens when they get back from Genosha and they arrive to the X Mansion and it's fine. But then the next issue you see, next episode, I keep saying issue, you see previously on X-Men, and they come to a destroyed X Mansion that Juggernaut had demolished. So episode 7 airs, then they go straight to 9 and 10, then they go back and show us episode 8. And then when they re-aired episode 7, it shows them showing up to the mansion demolished. But that was just that was a one-off. Season 2 is probably the only season from beginning to end that there are no continuity problems. Then season 3, it's all over the place. It's like, this airs, and then, we find out after Jean supposedly killed herself in a Storm 2-parter in Savage Land Strange Heart that Jean's on Muir Isle being studied by the X-Men that aren't present for this adventure. But we're like, but wait a minute, we just saw her sacrifice her in the sun. Did she show up off screen somewhere? So that's when it all got plagued at that time. And then there's an episode later that shows what was supposed to happen between Phoenix Saga and Dark Phoenix Saga. And the Dark Phoenix Saga is really well animated. But as you know, like the Goblin Queen, Emma and the Black Queen's outfits had to be,
it's funny because at the end of the second episode, like when we had the Jean doppelganger show up, I instantly knew it was Goblin Queen. And that was my first thought. I was like, oh my God, what is her costume going to look like? And I have to say, I was completely satisfied. I thought they did a good job. Now, if only Havoc can show up and show us his Inferno costume.
We'll talk about that later, too. Unfortunately, I do have to head out soon because I'm meeting someone for dinner at 8:30.
Yes, I know. I do want to wrap this up. One more thing I want to talk about before we wrap this up, because I did want to keep it around an hour because, I want to do this. We'll come back and talk about episode 4 next week, and I don't want people to get too bored with us. But how could they ever? I doubt it. But Is it just me, and this parallels another one of our favorite controversial relationships, but the relationship between Magneto and Rogue is a little cringy given the huge age gap, don't you think?
Well, that was introduced right before Age of Apocalypse, remember, in the comics?
Of course, yeah, the Savage Land stuff, which I was totally fine with it at the time. I was like, thought it was great.
But the thing that was very disconcerting in the comics when they show you in the Age of Apocalypse, when they do the flashback of when Rogue joins the X-Men, she's like in her mid-teens to late teens, and Magneto becomes her caregiver because Mystique drops her off at the X-Mansion. And at that time, those alternate universe X-Men, I think Storm is one of them, Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and I'm like, wait a minute, they end up getting married later on in this storyline. So it's like, so Magneto's kind of like her foster dad who becomes her husband.
So she's the Celine Dion of the X-Men, I guess.
But, it's kind of like we could talk about,
I know.
that we've done in DC Comics about how much is this age gap between characters?
Between Terra and Terminator is what I was referring to, but
Oh, I'm not even talking about she was a killer. I don't care what happened to her. She was a cold-blooded killer.
I know. I just like I know.
But Donna Troy and Terry Long, people have
another one of my favorite cringe relationships. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We won't talk about him either because we don't have time to get into a slugfest right now. And
no.
But anyway, so I guess that's a good note to wrap this up on. Do you want to say anything else before we finish our conversation of this weekly recap?
No, I think this was a lot of fun. I hope people actually watch, but it's you, and you have a very, high fan base. So they're not watching for me, they're watching for you.
Well, you're going to be the breakout star of the channel. I'm happy to introduce you to society, and hopefully people love our chemistry because we need good gab on the internet about comic books. And I had a blast, so I don't care if anybody watches it or not. We're going to do it again, bitch.
Exactly. Excellent.
All right. Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Philip. Thank you. Just hang out for a second after I wrap the show, then I'll just say goodbye to you. But thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our weekly recap. It was so fun to have a special guest this week, and we will be back next week to find out if Storm gets her Power's back. Probably not for a couple episodes, but we're hoping this is what we're going for. So thanks for watching, everybody. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Hit like and give us some good comments in the comment and show some love for my friend Philip. Thanks, guys.